Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I'm going to take a look at Star Trek Generations from 1994. It has a 47% on the tomato meter and an audience score of 57%. It's rotten. I would say, as a lifelong fan of Star Trek, yes, this crosses into rotten territory. It gets worse as you go along with repeated viewings. It does not improve with age. It becomes more sour with age, to use a wine metaphor. Now, the reason why I think this is a very disappointing transition between the original Star Trek cast movies from the original show and the Star Trek The Next Generation show. It's unfortunate that this was the transition movie. It comes across more of a extended TV episode of Next Generations. Um, that's about as much thought that was put into this. There are way too many plot holes that are obvious. There are plot holes in other Star Trek movies, to be sure. There are plot holes in much of Star Trek. But the problem with this is the movie is not crafted in a way to cover those plot holes. It's very lazy. No effort was made to conceal these plot holes. And so upon the second viewing and every viewing afterward, you're just finding more plot holes, and it comes across almost as comical, except you don't laugh. You just find it very off-putting as a Star Trek fan. Some of the obvious plot holes are that, for example, you have a villain who takes the hardest route to get what he wants. He has much easier means at his disposal to get what he wants as a villain. He ignores it and does the most convoluted way possible to achieve his goal. As a mirror of that, the protagonists, the heroes of the story, both Captain Kirk, Jean-Luc Picard, the other cast members of Star Trek, they just go along in the same fashion and also make the most nonsensical choices to get what they want. For example, there's a time travel element to this plot. This is revealed about halfway through, maybe a little further than halfway through, that this is going to have a time travel element. And yet, with this time travel element, both the villain and the good guy make choices along those lines that make it more difficult on themselves just to keep the plot moving. There wasn't a lot of thought put into this by the writers. They botched it. You watch this a second time and it's not passable at all. Whereas the first time in the theater, this was passable, if not a little bit boring to a Star Trek fan. Let's move into the audience reviews. You're going to get some more detail than I provided, certainly. 3.5 stars, 71 out of 100. Star Trek Generations is a bit of a letdown. It basically reaches the same level of mediocre as Star Trek V: The Final Frontier did. The passing of the torch is pretty nice, but it felt like William Shatner was only in this movie for the paycheck and not for the fun of it. The set design is amazing and the special effects are getting better with every movie, but the script is just not really up to par with the really great Star Trek movies. Overall, Star Trek Generations is one of the weaker movies in the franchise. We're in August 2019 on these reviews. I'll agree completely that it's the weaker, but not quite the weakest. You could argue that Star Trek Nemesis is the worst, the most rotten and boring of all the Star Trek movies. Star Trek V of the original set of movies is considered the worst of those. It's not as boring as Nemesis, but it's just as rotten, most likely. This is certainly not the most rotten, but it's like just one step up from the most rotten. Half a star. Why did William Shatner appear in a film where Captain Kirk gets killed off? Terrible decision from Shatner to allow that to happen. Malcolm McDowell and Alan Ruck are notable bad performances. I agree completely. There was no reason why you had to kill off Captain Kirk to just pass the torch to the Next Generation crew. He could have easily just died of old age or something else that's left up to the audience's imagination, as it had been up until this time. But for some reason, they need him to die off, and yet they do it in a wasted way. They do it in a way that's not climactic, and it doesn't have any emotion or feeling to it. It just feels like a waste that you killed him off for nothing. It almost feels like he's killed off with the same emotional impact that one of the red shirt characters are killed off in the original Star Trek series. If you're a Star Trek fan, you know what I'm talking about. If they were to kill off Kirk, they should have done something with that, and yet they did it for apparently no emotional impact. They acted like you're supposed to have an impact, but you don't get one. Also, the crew, both the original crew and the Next Generation crew, at the resolution of the movie, they kind of barely pay lip service to the fact that Kirk was killed off. They recognize he was an important character, but again, it seems like even the characters didn't get any emotional impact from that. It's very weird. Again, it feels like a drawn out episode of TNG, and an episode that wouldn't have been very good on its own either. They put Whoopi Goldberg's character of Guinan in this as a major plot point. It's not done very well either, and it's kind of boring. She's an acceptable character in The Next Generation, but she's certainly not a character you would associate with an action movie. Star Trek motion pictures are considered action adventure type movies. She just drags it down, not as an actress, but just her character doesn't work with this story. It makes it become dull. This isn't a romance. It's not a thought-provoking character drama. It's not, you know, the episode from TNG, The Measure of a Man. It's not meant to provoke deep philosophical thoughts in you. This is supposed to be an action adventure. It's supposed to be fun. So putting Guinan in it was just a waste of footage, in my opinion. Let's move on. 3.5 stars. It's an okay handover movie from the original crew to the TNG crew. Wish it had a better story, as it feels like an extended TV plot. Could be better. I agree. That's why I would give this personally 2 stars. Peaking at 2 stars. Wouldn't go a hair, not even a micrometer above 2 stars. 3.5 stars. Overall, this was and still is one of my favorite Star Trek films. Is it the best one? Not by a long shot, but it is still a fun film and worthy of the Star Trek name. Just barely. Again, wasted opportunities. We were treated to a lot of footage showing us how Jean-Luc Picard's character was really broken up about the death of some family members. That was supposed to be impactful to us so that when he went into the Nexus and he saw those family members again, we would feel this special feeling with him. It didn't work. It was a waste of footage. It was a complete missed opportunity. It was just flat out boring. If I wanted to see Patrick Stewart reprise his role in A Christmas Carol, I would have gone to see A Christmas Carol or one of the stage plays of A Christmas Carol. But he kind of had that thing going on in this movie, and this is supposed to be a Star Trek action-adventure movie. It didn't work. 3 stars. It's nice to see the 2 most iconic captains of the franchise on the same screen, but little is done to take advantage of the situation. Yeah, I'll stop right here. They have Jean-Luc Picard and Captain Kirk inside the Nexus in this like fantasy world. They're inside a cabin in the woods. It could have been a cabin in the Rocky Mountains. They have them doing all this wasted footage, in my opinion, of them cooking breakfast and talking about, you know, things like how the weather is, how the breakfast is coming out, and how Kirk is like thinking about one of his old flames that he's taking breakfast to upstairs in the cabin. It's complete nonsense. It doesn't take you anywhere. It doesn't accomplish anything. It's a waste of footage, in my opinion. You have these 2 iconic captains of the Star Trek universe together, and what do you do with them? You spend a lot of time with them cooking breakfast, waiting for the toast to pop out of the toaster. What? Very disappointing. Even when I first saw this in the theater, I was very disappointed at this. I'll continue with this review. It does enough to entertain, getting dull at the end. No, it got dull in the middle too. Data struggling with his emotions chip is a fun subplot that adds a little brevity to the movie and does a lot. I'll disagree. It's very off-putting watching Data struggle with his emotion chip. It's more like watching Brent Spiner do little comedy routines and singing, dancing routines, and it's very cringy and strange in the middle of this. And it just keeps turning up again and again and distracting you from the seriousness of the actual plot they're trying to give you. It fails completely. Continuing, this is easily the highlight of the film, and unfortunately the movie feels like a letdown by the end. Enjoyable, but should be so much more. I completely disagree. It's completely off-putting, the data emotion chip subplot to this. It's workable in an episode of Star Trek TNG because they had subplots like that with data, but it does not work in a film where you're trying to feel the gravitas between these two iconic Starfleet captains. It's completely cringeworthy in that regard. 4 stars. The first Star Trek film to feature the cast of Next Generation, and I was pretty pleased with this installment. Maybe not as impacting as the film before this one, but I thought this was a good tie-in for the next set of films. I might also comment that the effects were quite good in this one compared to some others. No. In fact, not only were the plot holes more obvious, but yes, they spent money destroying the Enterprise yet again, and the effects on that for its time were good and convincing. Uh, but it was all for nothing. You were supposed to feel something from the Enterprise being destroyed again. But to me, even seeing that the first time, it came across as we just need to destroy the Enterprise again because we can't think of anything else. It didn't make any kind of emotional impact on me. We've seen the Enterprise destroyed in almost every other Star Trek movie out there. We're looking for something new. 4 stars. Bizarre space phenomena and an obsessed antagonist boldly expands the Star Trek universe. No, it doesn't. It adds something new to the Star Trek universe, this idea of the Nexus. That could have been something cool in the Star Trek universe, but it never appears again in the Star Trek universe. It never appeared before. It has no relevance to anything. In fact, the more you think about it, the more it actually wouldn't work as a plot device because it would introduce too many problems. For example, when the characters go into this nexus, they're in a place that's kind of outside time and space, and when they choose to leave it, they can go to any place and time they want. Well, this right away introduces plot holes because why can't the villain or the protagonist or Kirk or Jean-Luc Picard, why can't any of these 3 people in the Nexus just simply go to more relevant parts in the timeline to undo everything else in the movie that came before? It's the worst kind of time travel plot hole. And not only that, you can actually make the case that none of these characters actually ever left the Nexus because you never see Sauron leave the Nexus. You only see Kirk and Picard choose to leave the Nexus. So technically, by the movie's own logic, Sauron never left the Nexus. So even though they defeat him in the timeline of this movie, Sauron still won because he still got into the Nexus like he wished, and he's still in there, timeless. So this fails. And so if you would introduce this Nexus concept into, like, say, further episodes of TNG, it would have just caused more problems than it solved. This is time travel done in the worst way, the most problematic way. 5 stars. A credible attempt to resurrect the moribund Star Trek film franchise. Creditable, no. I mean, people got paid, but a lot of actors were miscast. Particularly on the bridge of the Enterprise in the opening shots of this, the part where James Kirk was like killed or taken into the Nexus. They cast the worst people. I mean, they had some of the original characters. For some reason, Leonard Nimoy knew better than to show up. But these original characters had almost no role, and the ones that did have speaking roles were the most cringiest, off-putting characters that they inserted into this scene, and it almost seemed like they had chosen to put people that just wanted it. It was on their fanboy checklist to be in a Star Trek film, and they gave the nod to these B.C. Level actors and actresses that just wanted to be in a Star Trek film, and they performed like they were just fanboys that wanted to be in a Star Trek film. So it was off-putting to me within the first 5 minutes of this movie. Very bad. 3 stars. It's okay, but sure not great. It's okay, maybe, but you don't even need to see this movie. You could skip this movie and just move right into Star Trek First Contact and ignore this movie entirely. There's nothing needed in this movie that you need to know about to enjoy further material in Star Trek. Absolutely nothing at all. 3.5 stars. A great job by the cast, and visually stunning effects make up for the story that runs with two left feet, trying to bridge the gap between these different aesthetics of the original series and the next generation, leave the film feeling like it hasn't captured the spirit of either generation. I'll largely agree on that, and I'll bring up another point. They were lazy again because they had an opportunity to, yeah, to show you the best of both the original series and the next generation, to show off both of those, to make those shine so they could contrast those, but they didn't, and they were so lazy that they actually used already, they took shots from previous movies and used those shots in this film because they were too lazy to make their own space explosions. For example, it's quite obvious they took a shot of a Klingon warbird being destroyed in Star Trek The Undiscovered Country and just flat out used that and other similar effect scenes in this film. It's very lazy. It was obvious to me when I saw the film. Really bad. Lazy, lazy, lazy. 2.5 stars. Unfortunately, they couldn't let Captain Kirk go out on top in the last Star Trek movie. Yeah, he died in a completely meaningless way. It didn't have to be canon. You could have just not had him die, or you could have had his death be mysterious. That would have been preferable. But instead, you just you killed an iconic character like that for absolutely nothing. Like, he died in a worthless way, was buried in a worthless way, and was just brushed off in a worthless way. Very, very off-putting to a regular fan, certainly. 2.5 stars, not bad. It was a bit long for what it needed to do. It was cool seeing the two captains together. Nope, seeing them together was a complete wasted opportunity. It was cringeworthy. 3 stars. It isn't quite as bad as other odd-numbered Star Trek films, but it certainly doesn't escape that theme. Somewhat contrived, Star Trek VII, or Generations if you prefer, is hampered by an over-romanticized view of the old and the new changing hands. Overall, it's something lethargic and lacking emotional connection, and firmly rests in the mediocre tier of Star Trek films. Yeah, it's like the movie was shot in a way that expected us to just bring along some kind of nostalgia, and because of that nostalgia, we would feel this sense of awe from seeing these two iconic characters together, Picard and Kirk. But it was so lazy, it didn't actually try to give us anything. It didn't try to at least give us a situation that we could feel that. It just thought, no, no, these are hardcore Star Trek films from the original series, and they'll just bring so much nostalgia in here, seeing Kirk again. The rest we can just do as cheaply as possible. That's the way this comes across. 4 stars. Underrated in my opinion. Corny, but ultimately fun. Everything doesn't need to be great. Sometimes being entertained is enough. Yeah, but it wasn't even entertaining. Too many plot holes, too. Plot holes upon plot holes. The villain actually sends a missile to the sun to block out a sun, to neutralize a sun, for the purpose of getting this nexus to alter its course through space, to hit him, to take him into it. It makes no sense, because if this character knew where the nexus was going to go in space in the first place, why didn't he just take a ship out there and get into it? I mean, why did he need to like block out a sun? And then the plot hole, another plot hole, he's going to shoot at what looks like a missile, like what we know as a missile propelled by chemical propellants, to the sun from the surface of a planet that I would assume is, you know, by Earth standards, billions of miles away, like our sun is. And the missile reaches this sun from the point of being launched from the planet's surface in just like less than 4 or 5 seconds. So this missile is traveling at like warp 20 or some ridiculous speed, and the Enterprise, for some contrived reason, can't like shoot it because it's going too fast. What? This makes no sense in the Star Trek world. Nothing about this makes sense. It's the biggest plot hole before the other plot holes. It's completely ridiculous. It's like they expected us to be so overwhelmed with nostalgia by seeing Captain Kirk in a movie with Picard that we would just like overlook all this other stuff. It makes no sense. Half a star. Made me appreciate the motion picture, just stupid. Why didn't they just beam him in the Nexus if he wanted in so bad? Sloan could have hired a crew to take him and save us this garbage. Yeah, again, the bad guy was only a bad guy because he was willing to do anything and kill anybody in his way to get into the Nexus. Well, why didn't they just like take him to the Nexus and say, here, we'll just give you this shuttlecraft and you can fly out to the Nexus and then like have a good time? It makes no sense. 3.5 stars. I love the TNG cast, but let's be honest, had the film centered around the Enterprise B, that era, this movie would have been superior. The TNG cast deserved its own movie, as in this one they only played a supporting role. It is a good movie, but far better out there. I'll agree with this. They give you like a completely time-wasting scene in which the TNG crew is in the holodeck on board like an old British Empire sailing ship. It's completely time-wasting and stupid. It contributes nothing to the plot. It's just like something out of an episode of TNG. It's just to show you that, like, yeah, the TNG characters are here doing something. What? It, like, makes no sense to me. It's a complete time waster. You know, it starts out showing a champagne bottle flying through space, and then you see it explode on the outside of a retrofitted or a new model of the Enterprise. It's its christening in space. Okay, great. And then everything from there on is downhill. There's a lot of just wasted footage, wasted opportunity. The whole thing is completely lazy on every level. Why do we need to see the TNG characters in the holodeck having a fantasy in the holodeck? What does this have to do with any of the rest of it? It just doesn't. It's a waste of footage, really. 3 stars. Starts strong, then slows down almost to a stop until the Enterprise blows up. Then it crawls again until Shatner returns. Stupid story plots of killing family members for absolutely no reason and adds nothing to the story of character. As usual, Troy and Crusher are worthless characters. Yeah, pretty much. Everybody's just there to show you that, hey, look, we got TNG characters signed on to this movie. They're doing stuff. 2.5 stars. It seems more like a CBS special than a worldwide blockbuster film. Yeah, it's just like a bad episode of TNG, not even the good episode. 2 stars. TNG first foray into the big screen just doesn't measure up. Bring together the new Picard with the old Kirk. The idea of having these two on the screen together was a good one, but poorly executed, leaving plot holes, shabby storytelling, and bad dialogue. The original Star Trek movies did a good job overall putting together their movies. If this is the start of the new TNG series, it has a lot of work to do. Well, this review is from 2018, so surely they knew that this was not going to be the best of the Star Trek films. It is like, I completely agree otherwise. This is the worst, most sloppily, lazily done way to send off the new series. Complete fail. 4 stars. A much maligned reflection on mortality, the decline of old age, and lifelong regret. No, this movie doesn't deliver any of that. If you thought you saw that in here, you were way out to lunch on this. I don't know who paid you to try to find that here, but there's none of that. Lucas likes to say Star Wars was never about space or starships or battles, but about the drama of family. Well, Star Trek is all about the starships and exploration, but never fails until recently to present that exploration as it truly is, a pursuit that goes ever inward as it goes ever outward. What we discover in the expanses of space are not without consequence. Okay, I don't know where this guy's going. Again, it looks like he's going to find something far beyond what's in this movie to justify the 4 stars. I completely disagree. I'm not even going to try. 3.5 stars. Despite several plot holes, a lame villain, and bad editing, Star Trek Generations still delivers an enjoyable viewing experience that culminates in one of Brent Spiner's greatest performance. What? This is Brent Spiner's most cringeworthy performance? What? I'm sorry, I don't usually do that in this, but like, I have to say, what Brent Spiner performance are you talking about? He was the worst parts of this movie. 1.5 stars. Interesting idea, but a very clunky delivery. After a wonderful send-off in the 6th film, seeing Kirk dusted off again for this is disappointing. I agree 100%. 3 stars. A fine movie that shows us the Enterprise D destruction. Aside from that, it's a weak movie, especially with the two greatest captains ever sharing a TV show cooking section. Enough said. Yeah, it is like a cooking show, a very boring cooking show with the two captains. Again, it's a complete fail. I say half a star. 5 stars. I loved the opening. Seeing the original cast back with new fresh faces is always good. Great performance by Patrick Stewart. Seeing him and William Shatner interact was amazing. You really get the best of both worlds. This is the X-Men Days of Future Past of Star Trek movies. This movie really makes you think. The action is done well, and this is just such a criminally underrated science fiction flick. Wow. Wow. I'll agree X-Men Days of Future Past is the greatest of the X-Men movies in my opinion. This is the worst of the Star Trek TNG pretty much. Wow, you're so far off here. I don't know how you even make this comparison and still type these words. 1 star. Star Trek Generations might be one of the most blatant examples ever seen of backwards writing. This film constantly has things happen for no logical reason, unless you take into consideration where they want the rest of the film to go. Yes. The plot doesn't have any flow to it, people don't behave sensibly, and they don't feel similar to the characters established in the Next Generation TV show. There are subplots that are so stupid and superfluous to everything else that is going on. Exactly. 5 stars. The crown jewel of Star Trek films, in my opinion. I'm not going to go further on that. 2.5 stars. The best thing about this movie was seeing Captain Kirk and Picard come together, but other than that, there was not anything that's good about this movie. I agree, not even 2.5 stars. 2.5 stars. Nice movie, nice effects, stupid way to die for Kirk. Really, the epic moment is cooking eggs and riding a horse. Jeez. Yeah, the horse riding was just as bad as the egg cooking and the toast making. Half a star. It was awful. No, it was rubbish. A whole film, no sense. I am so disappointed that they killed off Captain Kirk. He is our hero. Why the writers decided to kill Kirk off, I don't understand. Yeah, neither do I. They killed him off for no reason at all. If you had chosen to kill him off, you should have done it in a way that would have been, hey, something iconic. They didn't. They killed him off like swatting a fly and then moving on. It made no sense. I say, going through this and thinking about it harder, I'd say that audience score is too high. This should have been like a 25% audience score. I say even the critic score is too high. Again, I don't attempt to figure out what the critics are thinking. I think the critics should have panned this all the way to 5%. This is pathetic for a Star Trek movie. It's so lazy. They weren't even trying. And that's my final word on this. And I will see you again on another episode of Rotten Reviews.